Thank you for bearing with me. I would just like to say that this is recorded on the traditional and ancestral and ceded territories of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish people, and the Coast Salish nations. I am a visit settler on this land, and I pledge to do what I can and what I'm able to support the nations upon I live on and the people I live with. Welcome to chapter 13 and 14th of Knowledge Architectures. This one's about functional architecture for knowledge categorization, and then indexing and keywording. This is these two chapters are really great, actually. This book has really started to hit the flow, probably right about just over the midway point. And really, I'm just going to take these two chapters together. The first chapter is about knowledge categorization on a much smaller scale. You can think of it like if you're organizing your own files or your own Obsidian vault or things like that. This is the way you could do it. And then 14 is much more about how do we take that to an industrial scale? How do we bring that up to a larger format? She starts out with, she doesn't start out with, I found it useful to actually start with the last part of each chapter, in which she generally talks about the history of each topic of the chapter. And in this one, this is the category history, and she starts with personal sense making, domain, and that's kind of like way back when, in the earliest days, personal categorization was limited to personal items or maybe in very, very small groups. And then as books and collections and things began developed, I would think here of like monasteries and monastery collections. Those domains and domain collections began to be much more focused on those specific things. Another categorization you might think of is how the ancient Greeks categorized rhetoric and systems of knowledge and put those things together in like a very focused area of philosophy, but they had very poor categorizations of, oh gosh, I don't know, perhaps continents or peoples or like different languages because they saw themselves as being so much better than everybody else. Phase 3, according to Bedford, is universal or generic categorization, which is this broad sort of system, which you think like a Congress system, duodecimal system. These are systems that try to describe everything, everywhere, and they were used in libraries throughout the 19th and 20th century. They're still used today, obviously. Another example would be universal decimal, which is a much more advanced version of Dewey Decimal that tries to categorize everything. And then Bedford says the next couple of steps are industry-specific categorization. And this is absolutely right. The earliest thesauri were created by chemical companies who were looking to accurately describe all the chemicals that they produced or made or described in that sort of way. So these industry-specific categorizations lead to much more advanced knowledge organization and category organization than any of the systems before it. And she argues that we are moving towards a machine-generated corpus categorization, in which like machines like read through all the different texts and create categorizations. I am skeptical of that myself, but that's probably much more a focus of my own PhD and my own research there. So on the categories, according to Bedford, categories are grouped to which entities or concepts belong to based on the definition of the group and the characteristics of the objects. This is pretty simple. I mean, it does take it in very interesting ways. Like categories, we know what they are. We can go to the supermarket. We know like all the fish food is going to be in the fish aisle. All the bread and baking goods are going to be the baking aisle. And these are some of the same examples she uses in the books. She makes these points that we expect to be able to go through a category that's always hierarchy focused. We can go narrower and broader. It's very simplified. It's like if you're browsing Amazon categories, it just goes down, down, down. They're developed by defining the scope of the context and partitioning that scope into sets or group that makes sense to us. This another great example would be your closet or your book or your personal book collection, or if you're a knitter, to categorize yarn in a way that makes sense. Yarn categorization is actually incredibly complicated. I had no idea. That's something I recently found out. Hold on, my phone's going off. I'm just gonna hit it. Thanks for being with me. Yes, if you're somebody else who's using categorization system, then it needs to be clearly defined, which is, I think, something that makes perfect sense. That's what we all do. She refers to Rangathane's Prolegomena to library classification. Rangathane's a very famous librarian, wrote several laws about how libraries should organize and really influenced the knowledge organization systems of the world. His systems are still in use in India, but are perhaps less common elsewhere. Called Colon classification if you want to learn more about it. The 7 design principles that she says are essential. The first one is exclusiveness. No 2 categories overlap. They should all have the same scope and boundaries, and the content that defines rules. They should be ascertainable, which means that each category is minimally and immediately understandable from its name. Perhaps ascertainability is not a good an example of a bad example, but produce would be an example of a good thing. It's very clearly what it's about, and it's not any of the other things in the aisles. Consistency, as in like your rules for splitting up words, adding words, changing words, breaking down a classification makes sense. So if you're breaking down cars by year, then you might also want to break down trucks by year. So it should be very consistent across the systems. Next, affinity. Each category in a scheme should be defined from decreasing extension and context to its parent category. That's just a way of saying things need to get narrower and broader as they go. And then currency, which is just simply that if you're doing a system in English, the word should be in English. That's it. Differentiation, it should give, when you have a term, it shouldn't just lead to one thing. If you want to split it up further, if you're going down in hierarchy, you should always be able to split something to 2 different categories or more. But and here, arguably, Rangathane is 2. Modern technology lets us split things to a lot more than 2, but you should only do 2. You can't do 1 because that's not really a narrowing of that category. It's just stick with that one. And then they should be exhaustive. They should describe the entire system, whether that's a massive library or your personal yarn collection. They need to describe that personal, that particular context comprehensively. This is how you do it. You define your access points. That's like how you're going to get into it. This is a picture of my own file system, in which I have the 000s, top levels, and then it goes down to tens place with the 10, and then here I have category of education, and you can see some education ideas that I have. This is how you do it, and then you find categories for scope, you design the system, which I've just done, and then you desk test it, which I've been doing. I'm testing it and making sure it works for me. And then the next steps would be to integrate into business systems and then assess decisions and actions that way. You judge whether or not they worked out well. And that's what I'm doing constantly for my own file system, but that's just one way to think about it. But how do we go from this little dinosaur to this giant pridezilla? That is index and keyword evolution, the next chapter, chapter 14. This is her, again, the history, which I started with last one, but it starts with the era of language development. Language develops, and you get more and more specialized languages as things start developing into much more specialized realms. And then the practice of indexing emerged in phase 3. And indexing at the back of the book, the traditional word index, and that's how you refer to very specific things. And these indexes become more and more important over time, and they can refer to concepts rather than just words. And then concepts is really what the rest of this chapter is about. Finally, phase 4, the rise of controlled vocabularies. I talked about this in some of my other videos, but controlled vocabularies is really what she sees as the solution to a lot of the problems that she presents in this chapter. Area of keywords. We'll get into keywords in a second, but this is this next phase, the phase that we're kind of in, and then we're kind of also in the semantic area. And the semantic area is much more like semantic web, linked data technologies. And it leverages semantic applications and computer technologies to really bring keywords and indexing to that next level. The 2 contexts in which we talked about indexes in this chapter and throughout the rest of it. The index can be, as in chapter 12, a component of Xer system. That's the back of the book index that refers to all the various things. And second, it can be focusing on what goes into an index. In this one, we're going to focus on here: keywords, concept, and indexing terms. Why do we care? I'm sorry that these next 2 slides are just like massive blocks of text. I didn't really get a chance to refine them out further before the presentation today. But we care because it allows us to access things faster, more efficiently, better, cleaner, that sort of thing. We care because indexing terms are confused with labels that we use for categories. That's something we'll get into a little bit more, but this example here is really great. Consider how authors are taught to write well. They're encouraged to vary their language, to avoid repeating the same phrases with a document or a book. There might be 10 different ways to express a concept. The concept here being poverty, poverty mitigation, poverty alleviation, poverty reduction, poverty elimination. Full text searching, regular indexing is not going to really pick it up, but sorry, out of the box will not consider all these variations as a single relevance factor. Each term is assigned its own relevance rating. So even though the author is talking about poverty quite a bit here, he's using he's describing the same concept in like 5 different ways, which really is a limitation to indexing in this case. We also care about them because our SS behaviors in this modern world have changed in the age of full text and broader access to access. That's a sentence. That's not a phrase that's very hard to get random. We know what we're looking for on an idea of concept level. When you search for something on Google or Go Scholar, when you know exactly what you want and you just keep getting everything keep getting in your way because you know what you want, but you can't find it. And on page 7 in the Google search, you spend like so much time looking for it. That is really what she's drawing attention here. They serve an access function, but they're no longer the only solution available. I'm trying to think of a good example of this that I faced recently. And it might have been that I was looking for growing lights for my basil, which I'm planning on moving inside when the weather gets worse. And when you type in grow lights, you get like all these different sorts of things that are meant for like industrial scale. This is on Amazon. Industrial scale grow lights. You get like more personal ones. You get like things that specifically meant for marijuana. It's a whole mess, and like you have to like really refine all the things down and click around and limit your price before you get to what you want. So the solution to this is a managed vocabulary, slightly different than a controlled vocabulary. And she says that she's characterizing controlled vocabulary more as a managed vocabulary. She characterized the controlled vocabulary as semantically enhanced structure. I get absolutely what she's getting to, but a well-designed vocabulary, this is the cataloging aspect of cataloging and classification. A well-designed vocabulary really gets you exactly what you want. Perhaps an example from this would be if Amazon did way better control on its various categories, and you say like, I want Ethiopian coffee, and it had like all those coffee in like one thing, just click exactly that instead of like drilling down a coffee and then searching Ethiopian and then searching pricing. That would probably be a much better way of having a very, very clear managed vocabulary. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but 2 considerations and concerns that I really drove for the rest of the chapter is whether it's managed or unmanaged. And that is basically, is it tags and tagging that works through this? Is like, are you just building terms off of like a folksonomy or things that people have put together? Or are you like putting together like a very well-structured managed vocabulary with exact languages? The considerations on how you design your systems, your indexes are going to revolve around that. And the second one is like whether or not your indexing is machine run or human run, because the human run one is going to be much more expensive. It's going to be much more comprehensive. However, you're going to hire a professional indexer, professional taxonomists, and they're going to really develop that out. Whereas a machine one's it's going to be low cost, but it might not be nearly as good. It might not be nearly as comprehensive. And that's where she talks a little bit about this at the end of the chapter. And I'm looking forward to hearing more discussion about it. Thank you. I just realized I did the whole thing without sharing my screen, so I will upload the presentation. Gosh, I'll just hit the audio and put this video. Yeah, I'll figure that out.